Greetings and welcome to another lecture on Chapter 10. What we're going to be covering here are more of the personality disorders, which I began covering in the first video of this series. So the first one we're going to cover in this video is histrionic personality disorder. Now, histrionic looks a little bit like hysterical, and I very much think that that is not a coincidence. What marks histrionic personality disorder is excessive attention-seeking and emotionality. So this is a person who always needs to be the center of the attention. This is the person who has emotions that go everywhere. Because if they're not the center of the attention, then they just ramp it up. And they can ramp it up in any of a number of ways. They can become more lively, more emotional, more theatrical, more dramatic, more seductive. But yeah, if they don't get what they want, they're just going to turn it up to 11 if necessary. Other people, on the other hand, consider them not very fun to be around. That they're shallow, they care too much about other people, that they basically are not interested in, other people. I mean, they're only interested in themselves. Now, as you're reading this, you may be thinking of some stereotypes, and in fact, this is a disorder, whether in actuality or stereotypically or for some other reason, that tends to be diagnosed more in women than in men. To the point where it's kind of considered that it's the opposite, or it's the female version of a particular disorder we'll be talking about in another video, antisocial personality disorder, which tends to be found only in males. So again, it's like taking characteristics that are thought to be appropriately quote-unquote feminine or female and just ramping them up to the point where it becomes a disorder. And where that line is, of course, is very, very vague, like everything else that have to do with the personality disorders. Causal factors, I could just keep saying this. I should only record this once. It's comorbid with many other disorders, particularly other personality disorders, particularly perhaps things like borderline. But it's hard to distinguish. It's hard to draw that line separating this personality disorder from other disorders. As I mentioned before, it may be the female version of antisocial, in that histrionic personality disorder is sort of taking the stereotypic characteristics of females and dialing them to 11. Antisocial personality disorder, as you're going to learn in another video, is kind of like taking the stereotypes of males in our culture and dialing that up to 11. So sometimes they're thought of as just being the same disorder, excessive adherence to gender/sex stereotypes, perhaps. Some think that this is, a lot of the cognitive people think, well, this is just a problem with the ever-popular maladaptive schemas. So a schema is a way in which we think, in which we categorize, in which we believe about things, and maladaptive, of course, is a way that doesn't work very well. So maybe there's a need of attention, and they think they're not getting enough attention, and so they choose this method in order to get more. Except a lot of them figure out that they can never get enough, that they basically just need more attention than they will ever get. And yes, this is also a really good way to drive off your friends. And that's one of the things that often happens with people who have been diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder. Next, not coincidentally, is narcissistic personality disorder. The name comes from a Greek myth of Narcissus, who loved his reflection so much that once when he caught sight of himself in a still pool, he stayed there gazing at himself, unable to tear himself away, until he literally died and was transformed, well, Greek myth, literally, until he died and was transformed into a flower called the narcissus that also just hangs over water and seemingly gazes at itself endlessly. And so what do we have here? We have people who gaze at themselves endlessly. They have a feeling of self-importance. They believe they are much more important than they actually are. This is not to say that people are not important. People, of course, are important. But it's possible to blow that way out of proportion. And that's what narcissists do. They also have a huge amount of entitlement. They believe that they are entitled to all sorts of things. Other people may need to work for it, but they don't have to. Other people may not get certain things, but they will. Why? Because they're them. Um, so yes, these two things do tend to go together. They are preoccupied with being admired, because if they're not being admired, then they actually start to feel really bad about themselves. If they're not, this is where we start to get again vague with the histrionic. Although males can be narcissists just as much as females, it doesn't necessarily appear to be gender based the way that histrionic is. But they always have to be just not just the center of attention, but admired and looked up to, and just being thought of as being the most wonderful thing since sliced bread. That is combined with the huge amount of self-importance and the huge amount of entitlement and the huge need of being admired, and combine that with the fact that they basically could give a tinker's damn about other people. They don't care about other people. Other people don't matter. The only reason other people matter is how they can worship this individual, how they can make this person feel admired and worshipped and important and wonderful and fantastic, the way, of course, that they are entitled to feel. You get the idea. There are two subtypes depending on exactly how this more or less works. In some ways, it depends on what's going on underneath. The first is grandiose. Now, grandiose basically are people who believe, again, as I said, but this time just totally, that they are wonderful, they are amazing, they are perfect, and they firmly believe this. They believe it all the way down to their core. They are absolutely certain that they are the most wonderful, wonderful person that ever wonderfuled. And they just don't understand why other people don't see it. And if other people don't see it, then this grandiose type can become very aggressive and can basically force them to see it or punish them if they don't see it. And also they think that they should be dominant because they are Mr. or Mrs. Wonderful, and therefore everyone else should be just groveling at their feet. They should just be thankful for getting a smidgen of attention from Mr. or Ms. Grandiose / Wonderful. Or maybe it's hyphenated. The other type may look somewhat similar on the surface anyway, but it's caused by something fairly different. This is the vulnerable subtype. And what this is they still are arrogant and condescending, and they're always the victim, but underneath, they are absolutely certain that they are nothing. Absolutely nothing. That they are not worth, they're not worth in getting peed on if they were on fire. They are absolutely certain that they are just completely and totally and utterly worthless. And they cover it up by having to have people admire them, by having to have people constantly tell them how wonderful they are, how fantastic they are, how beautiful they are, how amazing they are. And this subtype you can tell because they're always suffering, they're always complaining, they're always whining. Grandiose people are like, well, whether or not you worship me, which you should, I know that I'm wonderful. But vulnerable to the subtype basically is, well, if people aren't worshiping me, then it must be because they know that I am nothing. And therefore they must worship me so I know that I am something. Yeah. Causal fact, some people may fluctuate between the two. Sometimes when they're feeling up, when they're feeling good, and they're certain that everything is wonderful, they are the more grandiose. But then when things start to go wrong or they start to worry about themselves or something, you see the vulnerable subtype come out. When we're talking causal factors, they appear to be caused by two different things. That's why they're talking about these two different subtypes. The first, the grandiose subtype, appears to be linked to parental overvaluation. In other words, the parents treat the child like they are a prince or a princess, or they are the most wonderful thing ever. They are the best child ever. They deserve everything. They're going to get everything, and so forth. And so these children grow up saying, well, of course I deserve everything and get everything because I am that important. I'm the prince. I'll be king one day or queen one day. And so therefore, you all should worship me, and so forth. The other subtype, in a way, is covering up. This subtype presumably has been informed, particularly as a young child, that they are worthless, that they are useless, and their parents will very often be very controlling, will not let them make any decisions. The parent decides everything. The parents may be very cold. The parents may be involved in everything. So both of these styles seem to be linked to parenting style, but one is almost they're polar opposites. One is the parents tell them they're wonderful, and the other is the parents tell them they're worthless. And both types, therefore, act as if they deserve all this wonderfulness, one because they figure it's their just due, and the other because if they don't get it, then they're afraid their parents might be right. The next personality disorder in some ways is the polar opposite of both histrionic and narcissistic. Okay, come on. There we go. Avoidant personality disorder. These are unedited videos, by the way. It is stream of consciousness, and whatever happens shows up on the tape because I don't have time to edit these. So enjoy. Avoidant personality disorder, again, is named more or less what it is, in that a person more or less avoids being around others. They avoid being social. They avoid hanging with others. They are very, very introverted. They are very, very inside themselves. This seems to be because of a fear of criticism and disapproval. It isn't that they want to be by themselves, and that's one of the ways that we separate this from schizoid, which I'll talk more about in a second. And that is here, people would like to be social, but they're afraid that the people that they hang out with are going to criticize them, are going to disapprove of them. They feel inept. They feel like they're clumsy. They feel like they're stupid. They feel like they don't know what to do around other people. And so therefore, because they fear, it's almost like a social phobia gone crazy. It's almost like a social phobia getting to the point where it basically controls the person's life. And again, where that line is, we're not exactly sure. The big difference between avoidant and between schizoid, is that these people are not happy being alone. Schizoids are fine being alone. They're happy being alone. That's the way they want to be. Why be around other people? No real reason. Here, people are not happy because they want to be social. They want to be around others. They want to have friends. They want to have lovers. They want to have, but they can't because they feel like if they're around these people, they'll be criticized and they simply cannot handle it. So as I mentioned, it might be a kind of social phobia run amok. And when we look at possible causal factors, it's interesting because the causal factors that go into avoidant, that go into social phobias in some ways seem to be inherited. Shyness is inherited. Fear of new situations, which is the opposite of openness to experience, one of those big five, that seems to be inherited. Fear of being negatively evaluated, that seems to be inherited. It can well be something that you learn, but it also seems to be something that you get from your parents, that you get the same way you get your eye color and hair color and skin color. And that is just kind of fascinating, but it does appear to be that seems to be what's going on. So maybe this personality disorder or maybe social phobias can be inherited. It's kind of an interesting thought. And with that, I'll end this video and we'll move on to the next.